Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're tuning in. This is our first off-season episode for the 2025 off-season of college football of Tailgate Trash Talk, brought to you by Backyard Sports. I got Bentley with me. How you doing on this fine Wednesday, Bentley?
I'm doing well. Doing well. The cold weather has creeped back after we warmed up a little bit this week, but I'm doing all right.
Yeah, we're supposed to get some ice, at least up here in the northern parts and southern parts of Pennsylvania, and I think New York's supposed to get some odd weather as well. So the Northeast is dealing with it again. Hopefully, it doesn't stick around too long this time, though. We were under a sheet of ice for 3 4 days the last time it came through, and then it started warming up. Finally, melted most of the snow, and right back at it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It was fun, good fun. Well, we got something special planned for off-season content. Trying to keep engaged, trying to keep content on the page. This week, we're looking at our top 5 favorite BCS or CFP National Championship games. Just so everybody's on the same page and tracking, this is literally BCS era and the new CFP era. I know there were de facto national championship games back when the AP and the coaches poll would decide who the national champions were, but they were never officially called national championship games. We would get like number one Penn State versus number two Miami in the Orange Bowl, and that would be the de facto national championship game, but it was never truly. Just ask Tom Osborne in Nebraska how that goes when you're playing in a game that doesn't feature the other team in the top two, and you go for two and you don't win a national championship.
Mm.
So we narrowed this down for the scope of this to the BCS era and the CFP era because we actually got national championship games in those two eras. Dad, thanks for joining. Robert, 75 today, down in the deep south. There you
Oh,
go.
must be
We could
nice.
we could use a little bit of that up this way. Shouldn't be too much longer, but one last snap from Mother Nature, I guess, in the winter here. Hopefully, is the last one. But well, let's get to it, man. Number 5, our fifth ranked favorite national championship game. You've got USC and Texas. I've got Alabama, Georgia, the overtime game for Tua and company against the Georgia Bulldogs. I was really, I was surprised you had USC, Texas at 5. Um, I'm not going to try to spoil anything. We'll talk about all these games as we go through. But I was surprised, and I'm going to be really curious to kind of get your thoughts on how you wrecked and stacked this game at number 5. Going up the list at number 4, you've got Ohio State, Miami, the double overtime game, the pass interference game, if you will, for a certain fan base that was involved in this game. And I've got the Florida State Auburn, the Auburn surprise appearance in the title game against Florida State and Jameis Winston prior to his kind of meltdown his sophomore year. 18-point comeback for Florida State. We'll talk a bit more about that game. But we do have some overlap, but this was one that has no overlap. The Florida State Auburn game is an outlier for us. Number 3, you've got Clemson LSU, and I've got Alabama Clemson. I know you like seeing a game that I chose where Clemson lost. You've got 2 of them on your list. And sliding up to number 2, there's the second one you have on the list. We'll have plenty of Clemson bashing coming up especially from the South Carolina Gamecocks fan. And my number 2 is that Ohio State Miami double overtime game. We'll talk quite a bit about that coming up here in just a moment. And to round it out, number 1, you've got the Alabama Georgia game that I mentioned previously on my list, and I've got the USC Texas thriller in the Rose Bowl from 2006 that you mentioned previously on your list. So I want to get started here, and we'll start right at the bottom. Oh, sorry, I want to do it this way so that we can keep our shiny faces on the TV. We'll start right there at the bottom, man. Talk to me a little bit about USC and Texas. This is one that I think a lot of people would have ranked pretty high. And that's not to say that you don't, right? Like 5 of, I think 27 or something games between the BCS and the CFP era. Talk to me though about USC and Texas. You've got them here at 5. You've got a couple of games where you got to, love and hatred, but you've got USC and Texas, and we're pretty far apart on this one because I've got it at number 1.
Yeah,
you've got it at number 5. So talk to me here about how this one stacks up to other games.
Okay, so we'll get to another point in the show, obviously, where I will date myself a little bit, or I can just do it here. 2005, I was, how many years is that? 13 years old, 12 years old, whatever. I think I was 12 because I played in January. So I hadn't quite grasped the magnitude of the moment yet, right? I knew who Vince Young was. I knew who Reggie Bush was. I have very, very fond memories of my dad driving me to school every morning and us listening to Mike and Mike on the radio. And so that was where I got like the majority of my college football knowledge, right? We were a basketball house and a Redskins house, right? Because that's what they were called when I grew up.
Yep.
So I could have told you every player that was on the Washington Redskins roster, but I didn't really know anything about college football. I've gone back and I've watched this game. I've actually watched it a couple times, already knowing what's happened, right? But I get that most people would put this, similar to you, as the number 1 game. These are 2 teams that I have historically rooted against. I'm not like, I like Texas, like it's fine. I love the state of Texas. I enjoy being in Texas. UT like claiming, well, first of all, they have like an incredible superiority complex, right? They're like, we're the best. This was the last time I played in a national championship game, was in 2005. So calm down, buddy. Relax. The game itself was incredible. Back and forth all the way through, and Vince Young running, was it the 5-yard touchdown in at the end of the game, like crossing the goal line right at the pylon, holding the ball like that. Phenomenal game, absolutely phenomenal game. I don't feel as though ranking it number 5 is like a knock against that. Like I could see why somebody might think that's disrespectful, but I don't feel that way. Putting it in my top 5 seems pretty respectful, especially given the time frame of my life that I was in. I was spending all of my weekends playing in basketball tournaments, locked in on college football at the time, right? But it's a phenomenal game. I loved watching replay of it. You get 2 of the most iconic like football coaches of all time, right? Pete Carroll and Mac Brown. So it was awesome. I really enjoyed the game. It just, for me, there were other more meaningful games in my lifetime.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we're gonna, on that, I think one point you made there is really important to understand. We are a bit apart in age. I was 21 at the time of this game. I was a senior in college at the time of this game, and I had 9 more years under my belt of watching, or 8 more years under my belt of watching college football, and understanding, right, the magnitude of what this game was at the time. But also, like, those were kind of my formative years of really digging into football and digging into the nuances of the game, because to that point, I was a fan of the game. I was a fan of the Washington Redskins as well at the time. And outside of that, I didn't have a whole lot in terms of like viewership. I was playing baseball. I was playing football. And I was playing sports year round, basically, during these seasons. But for me, the reason that I have it ranked at number 1 is this was like a battle of titans, and it was 2 titans in very different kind of spheres, right? USC was like, it was the height of the Pete Carroll era. It was the height of Reggie Bush losing his Heisman and all of this stuff. USC was just a loaded roster from top to bottom on both sides of the ball, and they had crazy good special teamers that they put in the league as well. And then you had Texas that, it was a little bit of a flash in the pan for a program that has kind of this storied history, but they hadn't been great. Mac Brown comes in, and Vince Young is like this supernova player. And to watch him battle and carry this Texas team to the win that he carried them to, and that's not to say they didn't have great players on it. This was a pretty great roster as well. But this was really, it was Vince Young against this juggernaut in the USC Trojans. And the way it ended, the dramatic running in of the touchdown by Vince Young after the game that he had, it was just an incredible viewing experience. And it lived up to the hype. That's another thing for me is some of these BCS and CFP era championship games have been really, really hyped up, and not all of them have delivered. This one was hyped up. It was kind of a David Goliath storyline leading up, if you would believe the media hype around it. Mm-hmm. But it was really like Texas and Vince Young and this supernova team taking on this dynasty of USC. And it lived up to the billing, 41-38, and it was a thrilling finish, a thrilling game all the way through. And like you said, you having it at 5, it's like there's only 5 games that have ever been played, right? You have it at 5 out of like 20. I think it was 27 or 29 or something like that games between the two eras. Mm-hmm. So we've got a pretty big pool to choose from, and you put it in the top 5. So this happens a lot. We do this when we compare players too, right? When we compare Jordan to LeBron, if you like Jordan as the GOAT versus LeBron, any LeBron fan is going to say, like, well, why are you hating on LeBron? Well, I'm not hating on LeBron. I just think Jordan's the GOAT, or vice versa, right? Just because you rank someone a little higher than somebody else, it doesn't mean you're slandering their name. It doesn't mean you're slandering this game. But that
there will be name slander, Gary. There will be name slander.
There will be some coming. Stay tuned. But for me, I think this game, more so than any of these other games that we're going to talk about, captures the difference between our age, like people of a certain age, and people, that look back on this game because they have to watch the highlights and whatnot. So I think for me, just being, in my early 20s when this game happened and all the hype and everything that happened with it, for me, that it sticks out in my mind so vividly. That this was such a great game, such a great experience to watch it. All right, moving up the list, you've got the Ohio State-Miami double overtime game. This one was full of NFL talent, full of superstars, and full of some controversy because of a call that went uncalled and some other things throughout the game. But this was a thrilling fucking game played between two incredible teams. One running back for the Miami Hurricanes will not remember this game very fondly, but this game finished in double overtime. Ohio State takes it 31-24. Talk to me about this one, why you have it ranked here at number 4.
So this game, you said it perfectly, right? It's a phenomenal game. There's NFL Hall of Famers in this game. There's future NFL All-Pros in this game. It's iconic players on both sides. It was an incredibly high skill game and well played on both sides, right? There was controversy around it, so it was an incredible talking point if you were into that sort of stuff back in the day. This game holds a very special place in my heart. This game is very nostalgic for me. This is the first college football game I remember actually sitting down with and watching with my dad. My dad, we were at my uncle's house, actually in Manassas. My dad's side of his family, they're from Florida, and so I, being 10 years old at the time, didn't really have a team because my dad was a transplant to Virginia, so I didn't have a team that I really, really rooted for, right? Because he didn't necessarily root for the local teams or whatever. So I remember being the game came on, and I was like, "Oh, who are we rooting for?" And my dad was like, "Well, we're rooting for Miami and anybody who plays Ohio State or against Ohio State." And so that at 10 years old, there was my natural born hatred for Ohio State, which has grown and morphed. Yeah, that's where it started, right? And it's kind of grown and morphed into all of the Big Ten and whatever. Obviously,
Notre Dame by proxy.
Exactly, 100%. Shout out to Ohio State, making me a bunch of money this year though, but we flipped the script. You lost your DC and your OC. Fuck out of here. Y'all are going to be bums next year. They're going to be really good next year, by the way.
Yeah. They're going to be loaded with talent.
Yeah. It was just, I remember I remember watching the game and then seeing players in the NFL as I continue to get older, where I was like, oh, look, like I remember that kid because he played in the national championship game. And then it was like the first time I remember my dad, my dad never gets angry at anything, right? Except for teenage age Bentley.
Who probably deserved it.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah, I was a terrible, terrible teenager. I'm not much better as an adult, but my teenage years were brutal. I remember him being like visibly and audibly angry at the TV when the pass interference was it not called in the first overtime against Miami, and it's like, wow, like this matters to somebody who has like no dog in the fight. You know what I mean? Like this is something that's bigger than just the people in this room right now, because you could hear the stands, you could hear everyone being so upset about it. And for as good of a game as that was, right? Talked about all the player. I didn't really list any of them. Reed, Dante Johnson, Ray Lewis, like Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee. You can go. The list goes on and on, right? All of those guys that were on the field, it meant a lot to them, and it meant a lot to like everybody, right? But this game, it has nostalgic meaning to me, so that's why I have it on this list. I don't remember it as well as some of the other games here, but like that game in and of itself just means a lot to me personally.
Yeah, for sure. And I misspoke. It was not a pass interference that was not called. It was
called. Yeah,
ridiculous pass interference that was called against Miami to extend the drive for Ohio State, who eventually scored a touchdown to force the second overtime.
Yeah.
For me, I've got Florida State Auburn here. 20. Now I forget the year, but Auburn against Florida, 2013, I think, right? Now I got to look it up.
Hold on, I got it. It is.
I had a bunch of years in between.
2014
National Championship game, 2013 season. This one for me was really fun because I remember the whole season, and that I think the season is really what sticks out for me.
Mm-hmm.
We were just coming off the Johnny Manziel freshman Heisman Trophy, and Jameis Winston followed that up with a freshman Heisman Trophy of his own, and then this was the Chris Davis year.
Yeah,
this was the Iron Bowl that ended on 109, officially 100, but 109. We all watched it, and we know he ran 109 yards. In one of the greatest calls that you'll ever hear on radio, because it's the Auburn team and it's the passion that they have. Like these radio teams that they hire for these schools, they're fans of the teams. They're not just hiring random folks. It's not like the pro game where they hire people who may or may not have played for the team, but they're professionals, right? This is two guys on the radio who are Auburn fans, and the Auburn's going to win the football game is like one of the calls that sticks out in my head, and why this game in particular for a national championship game sticks out. Because this was an Auburn team this is the best turnaround in the history of college football. Mm-hmm. They were a winless team in the SEC the year prior, and they go on and win the SEC, beating Alabama in that crazy Iron Bowl, and they end up facing Florida State in the national championship game, only to get up 21-3 in the first half and blow an 18-point lead to Jameis Winston and company. This was a fun game to watch. It was really crazy that like Florida State came back, took a lead in the fourth, and then Auburn got the lead back, and you're like, maybe they're going to actually pull this thing out. And then Florida State gets a late touchdown to win the game. But for me, it's the back and forth of this, but it's also like the totality of the season, coming off Manziel mania into Winston winning it as a freshman, and then facing an Auburn team that nobody had any business picking them to be in the national championship, let alone competing in the SEC, let alone being in the national championship game. And it was a crazy game to watch. I still Trey Mason. There's a throw. There were a few guys that went on to play pro from this game, but Trey Mason had almost 200 yards rushing in this game. Really was putting it to a very good Florida State defense.
Yeah, that was an incredible game. The Iron Bowl game, like we talk all the time about rivalries in the sport being like what makes the sport so special. It's the theatrics, it's the sounds of the stadium, it's It's the rivalries, right? Like my favorite rivalry is the Palmetto Bowl. There's the Iron Bowl, which is important. There's the big game. There's UCLA, USC. There's the Apple Cup, right? Like there's so many games. And when you get it to come down to the final play of the game, like they did, and Nick Saban, the great Nick Saban, of all the people in the world you expect to handle late game situations the best, goes out and just kind of makes an inexplicable mistake running his kicker out to try with like a 63-yarder or something like that. It's like, what are we doing? No, like what's okay. And then he like catches it. Chris Davis catches it. You're thinking, oh, they're gonna like try to return this. And then, like you said, the radio call, Auburn's going to win the game. Like, that's that type of stuff. And then you follow it up a decade later or whatever, and you get the 4th and goal from the 31 with Jalen Milroe and Isaiah Bond. It's like year after year after year, these rivalry games, they just deliver.
Yep.
And so you're thinking, okay, cool. Like, they were winless in the SEC last year. They call it lightning in a bottle. Whatever, like they'll probably lose to Missouri in the SEC title game. Missouri was in there, I believe it's like their 2nd or 3rd season in the SEC, and they're like, all right, we're here to play. You know, the 2 most recent additions, Johnny Manziel, like you mentioned, have won the Heisman. Missouri's like, all right, this is our welcome to the SEC moment. Well, Auburn comes out and hangs 59 on them in the SEC title game, and then you're like, all right, okay, cool. Like, are we going to pick them to win the national title? Like, probably not, right? And then they go up 18 points. You're like, they're not going to, like, actually win this, right? And sure enough, they didn't. But, like, it was just it was a lightning in a bottle season from a team that was, abysmal the year prior and probably should have won the game. I mean, you go up 18 points, you should probably win that game, right?
Yeah. Especially when you hang your hat on the run game and a very, very good defense that year as well. But Jameis and company got hot themselves, ended up winning the game.
Yeah, that's a good pick.
Blind squirrel finds a nut, right? No, just kidding. Moving up the list, at 3, you've got LSU and Clemson. At 3, I've got Alabama, Clemson, so we can share in the Clemson hatred here. I'll let you go first because we had a couple of honorable mentions. This was my honorable mention. For me, it was about the crowning of the best offense we've probably ever seen in college football and maybe the best team we've ever seen in college football. Joe Burrow and company, who just ran roughshod through a tough SEC. The SEC wasn't down this year for LSU to be this goddamn. They were just phenomenal. For those that don't remember, this was the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Terrace Marshall was on that team who ended up getting drafted. Randy Moss's son played tight end for this team. So they were just low. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the running back. They were absolutely loaded on this roster. But they go on to beat Clemson 42-25, and I know you were having fun watching this game.
Oh, I loved every minute of it. And that's coming from someone who does not like. I have no feelings about LSU. I typically like root against them. I'm not a Joe Burrow guy. I'm not a Brian Kelly guy. I have no like real allegiances to the state of Louisiana. I love the state of Louisiana. So probably my favorite like regional cuisine is Cajun food. Love Louisiana. But I don't really have strong feelings one way or the other about LSU, right? I loved watching that team. That was probably the most fun team I've ever seen in college football, right? Like maybe you could talk me into some of the Alabama teams more recently, but like the most fun Alabama team had Tua or Mac Jones as their quarterback, and like I'm gonna prefer to watch Joe Burrow over both of those guys. But yeah, like I picked that for the same reason that you said. Like it was the crowning achievement. It was the jewel on the ring. It was the fifth Infinity Stone in the gauntlet, or 6, however many there are, for Thanos when he completes it, and they get to the end of the game and they snap their fingers, and it's like, fuck, dude. Like Derek Stingley Jr. was on that team. Yeah, they had some dogs.
I didn't name about fucking a dozen NFL players.
Yeah, I mean, there were just so many, and their coach was awesome too, right? Ed Orgeron, go Tigers. Like, yeah, like it was just an all-time iconic team, right? The shots of Odell Beckham handing out cash on the field after the game ended, like the picture of Joe Burrow smoking the cigar. The single greatest like hype video I've seen for a college football team was on senior night in Death Valley when Joe Burrow had his name changed on the back of his jersey to be spelled Burreaux, and it's like a 4K video following him out of the tunnel. He like hands the rose to his mom or whatever, and then it pans to Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson do like this slam dunk. Like, so it chills. Like, that is what college football is all about. And that team was just the best to do it. Like, I would pick that offense over just about any other offense I've seen maybe ever. I mean, the only way to make it better is to put Lenore Sellers at quarterback. Like,
yeah, I'm with you. And honestly, the only reason that one probably didn't crack my top 5 is like I just couldn't. The game was over. Like, it was just it was such a like formality. Even going into the game, it was like, how's Clemson going to compete? Like, they needed to just have an otherworld effort from several players who just weren't going to have it against that. That team was so loaded. For all the faults of Ed Orgeron, that dude fucking put some talent on the field, especially when they captured all that talent in one season here. But yeah, the game itself, it was fun, and it was a ton of fun to watch this team. But the fact that it felt more like a formality, I wanted to highlight a few of these other games as games that were really like they had more elements in terms of how exciting they were on the field. Speaking of which, the other game here in our third slot, the other Clemson loss here in our third slot, Alabama-Clemson. This was part of the trilogy that we had between Alabama-Clemson 3 straight years in the BCS play or in the CFP. They either met in the semis or the finals in 3 straight years. Alabama comes out on top 45-40 in this one. This was a crazy, unbelievable back and forth game. This was during the time when everybody started to question, like, can Nick Saban stop a mobile quarterback at all? Because Deshaun Watson was killing them in these games. But Alabama had enough firepower in this one to win the track meet 45-40. They had just barely enough defense to hold on to a slim margin of victory here. And kind of the moment where Nick Saban may probably the moment he moved into like the upper pantheon of college football royalty when it comes to coaching. He did go on to win, I believe, 2 more after this, but this was kind of the one where everybody was like, okay, it's like it's Nick and Bear and everybody else.
Yeah. Also, Clemson scored last in this game. It was 45-33, and then Deshaun drove him down and got like kind of a garbage time touchdown. So it looks a little closer than it actually was. But yeah, you kind of said it perfectly there. My list may be a little skewed because these might not be the best games, but to me, these are the ones that are like, these ones stick out in my mind because I remember them for certain reasons, right? This game sticks out in my mind. I remember it specifically because this was the moment you had talked about it, right? Can Nick Saban make the adjustment to be the mobile quarterback? Well, there were also other like kind of rumblings around the Alabama program is like, can Nick Saban adjust to what college football looks like now, right? We all remember Nick Saban, and we can get to some auto mentions later, but winning or losing a 96 game to LSU, right? Like he was the defensive guy, and we ran the ball. This is the game that changed it, and this is what made everybody scared of him going forward, right?
Yeah.
He wins 2 more national
now.
Yeah, right. Like he wins 2 more national titles after this, and obviously I have the one above it there on my list. They didn't score as many points, but the game was completely different, right? Like Derrick Henry was still in this offense, but his quarterback threw for over 300 yards.
Yep.
That quarterback's name, Jake Coker. Like Nick Saban, and credit to his staff, right? He's always been a guy who credits his staff, so I will give them credit as well. Like going out and finding ways to generate offense with the quote lesser talented receivers or whatever. Like OJ Howard, a tight end, went for two bills and I think 3 touchdowns in this game, right? Like, and then Nick Saban was like, you know what? I could make this easier on myself by just recruiting all of the best quarterbacks and wide receivers.
And wide receivers, yeah.
Like, So this game was obviously incredible. It was not as close as the final score looked, although Clemson did outgain and won the turnover battle in this game. But that Nick Saban offense was just so efficient, running the ball with Derrick Henry and Kenyon Drake, and then throwing it to Calvin really didn't have a big game, but he was on this team. O.J. Howard was a stud on that team, and they did it with a quarterback named Jake Hooker, who, like, if you were to ask people, name the quarterbacks who won national titles at Alabama, Jake Hooker might be the last one that you name.
Or nobody names him.
Yeah, right? Like, but I thought the game was incredible. Obviously, anytime Clemson loses, like, I'm gonna relish in that moment, right? But this was a game that kind of flipped the switch for me. And, like, you talked about that Nick Saban got boosted into that upper echelon. 100% agree. Like, this was the one where everybody realized they have to be on high alert now because Alabama has discovered offense.
Yeah.
Outside of just running the ball.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not going to try to lean on the defense as much as they have in the past. All right, moving up to number 2, we've got a couple of games we already covered. And then moving up to number 1, I've got the Texas USC game we talked about earlier, and you've got Alabama Georgia 26-23 in overtime. This was the coming out party. Not this game in particular. The SEC title game was kind of the coming out party, but this was the finishing touch to everybody learning how to pronounce Tua's last name, Tagovailoa. This was an interesting kind of back-to-back game between these two teams because Jalen Hurts plays very, very poorly in the SEC championship game. Tua comes in. Well, then Tua gets nicked in the title game, and Jalen Hurts has to come in. And it was a very interesting dichotomy there. And then we end up getting the competition in the offseason, and Jalen Hurts ends up transferring after that following season to Oklahoma and winning a Heisman and yada, yada. So back to this game, though. Alabama 26-23 over Georgia. This was the Nick Saban and his assistants, right? This was the game that everybody's like, well, is anybody ever going to beat Nick Saban? We now know that eventually Kirby Smart does, but in this game, Big Nicky, Governor Nick just had the number of Kirby Smart, and Tua gets the job done. Alabama gets the job done. Talk to me about this game. Why you have it at number 1?
Well, obviously, like, the iconic fourth quarter throw by Tua to Devontae Smith for the touchdown. Like, you know, Jalen Hurts starts the game, is not good. They're down 13 points at halftime. I remember texting with my dad. This was one of the most talented backfields I've ever seen at an Alabama school. Like, I'll just read you the list of names of guys that got carries in this game: Najee Harris, Jalen Hurts, Tua, Bo Scarborough, Josh Jacobs, and Damian Harris. Like, those are all guys outside of Bo Scarborough who I thought was the best of that group, like, given the style of offense they were running with Jalen Hurts in the game. Those are all guys who got carries, like meaningful carries in the NBA, right? Like, or excuse me, in the NFL. Some of them no longer in the league, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. They were the most talented backfield I may have ever seen in college football, like, in terms of depth, right? So they're down at halftime, and I'm texting my dad, and I'm like, you know, if they just stopped trying to even throw the ball with Jalen Hurts and just ran RPOs with him and Bo Scarborough the whole game, like, they probably win because they're only down 2 touchdowns against a Georgia team who was also incredibly talented, right? Like, maybe Jake Fromm is not your favorite college football quarterback, but he was very good at Georgia. And then Nick Saban just kind of puts his nuts on the table and says, hey, we have this freshman named Tua who is really fucking good. Get your ass out there. And then he drives him up and down the field. And obviously he throws that fourth quarter touchdown to Devontae Smith on just a beautiful, absolutely beautiful go ball where Devontae, like he's still doing today in the NFL, burns the corner on the edge and gets free in the defensive backfield, and he takes it in for the score, right? So for me, like, it's just another amalgamation of Nick Saban adjusting to the moment, right? Being the best coach in that instance, right? He saw what was not working in the first half. He met with his coordinators and said, hey, we got to figure this out. And they came out and they figured it out in the second half. They made the change. He had the guts to make the change, make the call. And he went out with a team that was extremely talented. and beat his longtime assistant Kirby Smart, who similarly had a team that was also extremely talented, right? Like that may have been the best top to bottom 2 rosters to ever meet in one game. Obviously the Ohio State Miami game, the Texas SC, like there's a list.
Pretty fucking loaded though.
Yeah, it was an incredibly close, like competitive game all the way through. But to have that moment in the fourth quarter of backup quarterback is in, he makes the throw, beats the corner, walks into the end zone, like moments like that are things that live in college football lore. And that's just one of those things. I'll never forget that game. I'll never forget that play. I will never forget thinking Jalen Hurts just needs to run the ball. Why are we even throwing? They make the switch at halftime, and the Tua makes the game-winning throw. Those are just iconic moments to me that I will never ever forget as long as I'm watching football.
Yeah, for sure. And Devontae Smith, like relative unknown at the time, he was 2 years prior to winning the Heisman with Mac Jones. In this game, and I absolutely 100% flip-flop the 2 games. So this game was Tua comes in at half. The SEC championship the following year is when Tua gets nicked, and Jalen. I fucking in my brain I mixed them together, and but yeah, just an unbelievable effort from a guy who probably didn't expect to play a single really meaningful snap in this season, and Jalen Hurts is just filling his shoes in this game, and Tua comes in, saves the day. You mentioned it, talent laden, just NFL players across the board on both rosters. Knock down, drag out. Nick Saban continues his thumb on his assistants, at least for the time being at that time. All right, let's get to some honorable mentions. So I mentioned that my biggest honorable mention was LSU Clemson, the crowning moment for Joe Burrow and company, and that unbelievable offense that they had that year. But you had 2 that you were looking at. So I'll relinquish the floor, and you can talk to us about your 2 honorable mentions here.
Yeah, so 2012 national title game, 2011-12 season, whatever. Alabama beats LSU 21-0. I kind of hinted at it earlier. This was a season where LSU beat Alabama 9-6 in a game, and there was a little bit of controversy because that was, I believe, the title game was the 3rd time they played that year.
They played regular season, SEC title game,
and then national title. Everybody was like, "Oh well, we don't want to see this again. Like we already know what this looks like."
Because I think the regular season one was like a slow defensive struggle as well. If I recall.
It was the second time they played. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think ESPN doesn't have it, of course, but I think.
No, you're right. You're right.
I think LSU played somebody else in the. LSU beat Georgia 42-10 in
because it was East versus West. Then that's right.
Yeah, in the SEC title game.
So Bama couldn't play SEC
right
in the SEC title game.
Right, and so there was controversy of like, is Bama the second best team in the country? Why do they deserve to be in the national championship game? And I remember being on the side of Bama, right? Because like I was all in on Nick Saban. Like I'm gonna say I understood. I probably was a little early to the party, but like I believed in what they were doing at Alabama, right? And I'm like, you give Nick Saban a chance to play this team again, it's not gonna happen. And I know I'm kind of glazing Nick Saban, but he deserves it, right? So you play a game,
right?
They proved me right, People were like, Georgia should get a second shot at playing in the title game. Well, you lost 52-10.
Yeah.
Bama didn't do that. Bama lost by 3 points in a knockdown drag out. Exactly. And Alabama comes out and wins 21-0 in a national title game, kind of solidifying them as the best team in the country that year. And I think it was Saban's first title at
that was
Bama.
Bama, yeah.
So like that one, I included on my list the one where it all kind of changed for him, going from a defensive team to an offensive team. And then this one is the one that kind of kicks off the title run, right? It kind of kicks off the dynasty. Actually,
they won in 2009. Who the hell did they play that year?
See, this is just me not knowing what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Regardless, very, very impressive. I remember that because there was controversy about Alabama even getting into the national title game, having lost that 96 battle in the regular season and not playing in the SEC title game, which was kind of like an unheard of thing at this point in time. Obviously, we didn't have the college football playoff to help us decide who the best 4 teams or whatever you want to call it is. But I just remember that being very impactful because there's a lot of controversy around it. And I was on the right side of history.
Yeah, for sure. Why is this not telling me? Texas, Colt McCoy. That's
Wow.
right, the Colt McCoy game. That was a hell of a Texas team too. If
Yeah.
Colt McCoy doesn't hurt his shoulder, they got a shot against that Alabama team. But yeah, that one kicked off the first of several 6, I think, titles at Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
So there are 6 total, but 5
total,
at Bama,
one at LSU.
One at LSU.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember watching this game. I remember that year I was with you on the fact that I thought even after the Bama LSU game, I remember having conversations with folks and just saying, like, those are the best 2 teams in the country. Like, those are the best 2 teams in the country. And I remember thinking back then too that Georgia basically had the kind of meal ticket because they were in the SEC East, and the SEC East was not great during that time. There were, it was like kind of Georgia and everyone else.
Steve Spurrier.
The SEC West was very, very loaded during that time. Yeah. But I remember having conversations with folks and being, that's the 2 best teams in the country. In fact, it's very reminiscent of the number 1 on your list because Georgia or Bama did not play in the SEC title game that year either, because of head-to-head, and they end up getting into the college football playoff, and there was controversy, and they win a national championship with controversy again. Haters out there that don't want Bama, they don't like to see the best teams playing the best games.
Instead they want to see Indiana go to South Bend.
Yeah, and get pummeled. And you mentioned one other honorable mention that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, this one is another one that is I'm not going to say nostalgic because after I explain the story, you'll understand why it's not like the highlight of my life. I'm going to go all the way back to 2011, the Cam Newton season playing against Oregon and Marcus Mariota. Auburn gets the win 22-19. I remember this game like, oh my God. So I was leaving. For those that don't know, I was in the Army a very, very long time ago. And when you join the Army, you go to Fort Jackson most of the time, or you could go to Fort Sill. Fort Jackson's in South Carolina. It was January. It's the first week of January. And an ice storm had rolled through Columbia, South Carolina, and had shut down the base for 3 days. So I had reported on Sunday to the Richmond MEP station, and the base was closed for 3 days. And I sat in a hotel and watched this fucking college football game on Monday night, just kind of biding my time, waiting to leave for the Army. And it was obviously an incredible game. Like, the whole Cam Newton season was awesome, right? Yeah. Cam Newton, winner at every stage of football, made the Super Bowl, obviously, in the NFL, won an MVP. Like, nobody can take any of that away from him. I don't care about the stealing laptops thing, whatever. Like, he won everywhere he went, right? He stole a laptop, went to JUCO, won a JUCO national title, goes to Auburn, wins a Heisman, wins a national title there. Like, one of the best football players I've ever seen in my entire life. And watching him play against this Oregon team where, like, a lot of people who are my age, this was like our introduction, if you will, to what Oregon is today, right? The jerseys, they were fast. Their offensive line was undersized, but they would get out and run these wide sweeping motions and like all of this stuff, right? The Chip Kelly up-tempo offense, all that stuff, right? It was the introduction of what Oregon is as we know it currently to a generation of people who don't remember Oregon from like the early 90s and kind of the 80s where they were very good, but they weren't like Nebraska, you know? So this was like the first time I got to see Oregon on this massive stage. I obviously had watched Oregon play before because Mariota was in the Heisman contention that season, but like it was Cam Newton, and I think there was only one other player. I think it was the running back whose name was Dwyer.
Yep.
He was the only other player on that national title team to get snaps in the NFL. The only one.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
You win a national title. Yeah, for sure. I just the biggest thing I remember about this game and this season, we got number 1 and number 2 in the country, and number 1 and number 2 in the Heisman were playing each. Like this felt like the quintessential national title game matchup. Yeah. Cam was such a man amongst boys in college, though. Like especially this season at Auburn, like he just was a different animal. And you made the point. Only one other player got snaps in the NFL, and honestly, like he got spelling reps for another running back at a couple of stops in the NFL, but not many. He probably has a couple dozen carries for his NFL career. But Cam Newton was just that level of rising tide for this team that he couldn't be stopped. He was bigger than linebackers. He was faster than safeties, and you couldn't touch him. He was just that good. And he carried an Auburn team that when he left, things fell apart and G. Chizik got fired.
Yep.
And they weren't able to recapture any of that glory. He got Gus Malzahn hired as a head coach, and who ended up coming back and making another run. But this was Cam Newton for an Auburn team that goes on to win the national title against, as you mentioned it, right? Like the quintessential Auburn. That team was so fast. They were fast everywhere. Yeah. Offense, defense. They had pass rushers off the edge. They had Mariota, all the run. They had like 4 running backs they rotated that also returned kicks for them. And they had speed just everywhere on the field. And it was like the first real exposure we got to like what Nike money means to that university in terms of all the jersey combos and all the fun stuff that they do up there in Eugene.
I have one more game that I did not tell you about. This was, depending on who you ask, a national title game. We're going to go back to the year 2018. January 1, New Year's Day. Anyone who knows anything about college football knows that national title games are not played on January 1st. So you may ask yourself, Bentley, what are you talking about? What happened in 2018 that would compel you to put a national title game on your list that happened on the 1st January? Well, Gary, I'll answer that question. The UCF Golden Knights played a Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl against the Auburn Tigers and won 34-27 to complete their undefeated season. And if you ask a man named Danny Cannell who the national title winner was, he will say the UCF Golden Knights and Scott Frost, because they were undefeated and got left out of the college football playoff that year. And they did not get a chance.
Beat the team who went on to win the national title.
Yes, they did. So that's my last honorable
by
mention.
proxy national champion. They hung the banner.
They did.
They hung the banner.
Yep.
There actually were a couple of computers that had them as the national champion that year too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Probably those computers that only care about the 0 in the L column.
Probably, and that's fine. That's fine.
Oh, that was a great campaign though. They had a good time with it. We had a good time watching them, but that is one of the funnier banners to ever hang in a stadium.
And they can hang that banner with all of those Michigan titles that they just claim from like the 40s.
Yeah.
Like, go, sure. All right, dude.
Yeah, for sure.
Today's college football, they would make the 12-team playoff, and then they would get absolutely bounced in the first round.
Get pasted on the road somewhere.
Yeah, like they
might have hosted.
Yeah, what were the final? Can I see the final rankings? Yeah, those are standings. Give me rankings. Rankings currently unavailable. Okay, awesome. Why does nobody keep like records of that stuff?
Well, I think I'm looking at.
Give me the year 2017. So they finished final rankings. Oh, they finished 6th. But they were the highest ranked. Yeah, they would have gotten a bye actually if we did today's playoff ranking. Because you would have had Bama, Clemson, Ohio State, and UCF. Yeah, those would have been your highest ranked conference champions. And then like Georgia, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Penn State, TCU, and Auburn would have been. Yeah. So they would have gotten a bye and then gotten pasted by Georgia or somebody.
Yeah. For sure.
I just don't want people to forget that there was an unregistered national title game in 2018.
Well played, sir. Well played. Yeah, you mentioned the kind of old era of national champions. Could you imagine now, especially like if we had co-national champions? Several years where like the AP had one and the coaches had another, and they literally were just co-national champions.
Yeah. People would be in uproar, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So Twitter would be on fire.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. All right, bud. Well, good episode. Hopefully out there you learned a little something tonight about some of these games, and you also learned a little something about how my brain works and mismatches things. But any closing thoughts here?
Just a couple. Bill Belichick is doing the thing that we all kind of assumed he would do, where he's recruiting lacrosse players to come play football at North Carolina. So, the tradition holds strong for him.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that he likes lacrosse more than he likes football, but
he's trying to recapture some of that Chris Hogan magic.
Yeah, right. You got Ohio State. I talked about it earlier. Ohio State loses Chip Kelly, offensive coordinator, and I forget the guy, their defensive coordinator. Chip Kelly is going to somewhere. Vegas. Oh, he's going to Vegas. Yeah, to coach under Pete Carroll. Yeah, and then their defensive coordinator is going to Penn State to run the defense there for James Franklin. So they are promoting the wide receivers coach. Once again, names not my strong suit, but the wide receivers coach at Ohio State is now the offensive coordinator. He'll be calling plays for them next season. Also, quick shout out. I know we talk about On 3 here. We use their rankings for a lot of our stuff, their recruiting rankings, their bracket breakdown or whatever. Andy Staples, my guy, Andy Staples, released his way too early bracket prediction for next season. And if you've happened to come across it, just let your eyes coast around a little bit and then let them settle on the big number 10, the 10 seed for next year's predictive playoff bracket. There will be a team by the name of the University of South Carolina. And he actually has them winning their first round matchup in next year's game. So big shout out to Andy Staples. I love that from you. Maybe we can do this next show. The win totals in Vegas are out for a lot of teams.
Yes. I think that'll be a good one for next show. For sure.
Yeah.
Maybe do that in a week or two. We'll post it out there. We'll give everybody our predictions so that they can go bet their mortgages.
I may or may not already have a ticket in. I don't know. Who's to say if I'm that much of a degenerate or not?
Yeah. Well.
I am. In case you were wondering.
It's never a doubt. Never a doubt. All right. Well, hey, for Bentley and everybody here at Backyard Sports, appreciate the comment section as well. Dad, Robert, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to those out there that may have tuned in and not commented. We'll try to keep the page active throughout the off-season here so that we can keep everybody in the loop and come up with some interesting topical content so that we can all get our fix of college football while we wait for next season to start. But as mentioned, for Bentley and everybody here at Backyard Sports, this has been Tailgate Trash Talk, brought to you by Backyard Sports. We are